The Tel Dan Inscription, the House of David. A biblical archaeology sleep journey. Welcome. Take a deep breath. Let it out slowly. Feel your body relaxing, sinking into comfort. Tonight, we're traveling to the far north of ancient Israel, to a city gate in a place called Dan, to a moment in 1993 when a piece of broken stone changed everything we thought we knew about King David. This is a story of discovery, of stone speaking after 2,800 years of silence, of a name carved by an enemy becoming one of the most important confirmations of biblical history ever found. You don't need to work to remember details. You don't need to stay alert. Just let the story carry you. Let the words flow like water. Let yourself drift towards sleep as we explore this ancient place and this remarkable discovery. Close your eyes if you'd like. Breathe naturally. And let's begin our journey to Dan, the northernmost city. Imagine standing at the northern edge of ancient Israel. Behind you, to the south, lies all of the promised land, the hills of Galilee, the valleys and plains, Jerusalem far to the south. Before you, to the north, rise the foothills of Mount Hermon, with its snow-capped peak visible even in summer. This is Dan, the northernmost city of Israel. When the biblical writers wanted to describe the whole land, the entire territory, from one end to the other, they used a phrase, from Dan to Beersheba. Dan in the far north, Beersheba in the far south, everything in between. Dan sits in a beautiful location. 3 springs flow here, combining to form one of the major sources of the Jordan River. The water is cold and clear, bubbling up from underground sources, fed by rain and snowmelt from Mount Hermon. Even in the dry summer months, when other streams dry up, these springs keep flowing. Water means life. Water means agriculture. Water means a settlement can thrive. And so people have lived at Dan for thousands of years, building and rebuilding on the same site, creating a tell, an artificial mound made up of layer upon layer of human habitation. The city has had different names through its long history. In the book of Joshua, it's called Laish. Judges tells us that the tribe of Dan, unable to fully possess their assigned territory in the south near the Philistines, migrated north and conquered Laish, renaming it Dan after their ancestor. It's a strategic location, sitting on the major road that runs from the coastal regions up into Syria and beyond. Dan was a commercial hub. Caravans passed through. Merchants traded. Armies marched along this route, for good or for ill. And it's a border city, a frontier town. To the north and east lies Aram, Syria in modern terms, a kingdom that was sometimes Israel's ally, sometimes its enemy, and often somewhere in between. The border between Israel and Aram shifted over the centuries, sometimes running south of Dan, sometimes north of it, depending on which kingdom was stronger at the time. The divided kingdom. Let's set the scene in the 9th century, BC. The year might be around 840 BC, though we can't be certain. King David has been dead for over 100 years. His son Solomon, who built the great temple in Jerusalem, and ruled over a united kingdom, has also been dead for generations. The kingdom has split, divided into two rival nations. In the south is Judah, ruled by descendants of David. They control Jerusalem, the temple, the historic heartland around the old city of David. The kingdom is smaller, less wealthy, but they have the temple, the symbol of God's presence. And they have the promise that David's line will endure. In the north is Israel, the larger and more prosperous of the two kingdoms. They have better farmland, more cities, control of the major trade routes. But they've broken away from the Davidic dynasty. They've set up their own worship centers, their own royal line, their own identity separate from Judah and Jerusalem. Dan is in the northern kingdom, in Israel. In fact, Dan becomes one of the two major worship centers that Jeroboam, the first king of the northern kingdom, establishes as alternatives to Jerusalem. He sets up golden calves in Dan and in Bethel, telling the people, "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." It's a political move disguised as religion. Jeroboam doesn't want his people traveling to Jerusalem for festivals, lest they start feeling loyalty to the southern kingdom and the house of David. So he creates worship centers in his own territory. Dan at the northern extreme, Bethel at the southern border with Judah. The prophets condemn this. They call it idolatry, a betrayal of true worship. The golden calves at Dan and Bethel become synonymous with the northern kingdom's unfaithfulness. The sin of Jeroboam is mentioned again and again in the books of Kings. But regardless of its spiritual condition, Dan is an important city, a border city, a commercial center, a city with strong walls, impressive gates, a significant population. And it's a city that sees conflict. The Aramean threat. To the north, in Damascus, the Aramean kingdom is growing in power. Their kings have ambitions. They want to expand their territory, control trade routes, extract tribute from weaker neighbors. Sometimes Israel and Aram are at peace, even allied against common enemies. But often they're at war. The Bible describes these conflicts. In 1 Kings 15, we read about Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, attacking the northern cities of Israel at the request of Asa, king of Judah, who wanted to pressure Israel. Ben-Hadad attacked the towns of Israel. He conquered Ijon, Dan, Abel-Beth-Makkah, and all Kinnereth, in addition to Naphtali. Dan is conquered, occupied, perhaps destroyed and rebuilt. The border shifts south as Aram gains the upper hand. Later, in the time of King Ahab of Israel, we read about wars with Ben-Hadad, battles won and lost, territories changing hands, the northern border of Israel fluctuating, and later still, a king named Hazael comes to power in Damascus. He's a usurper, not of royal blood. 2 Kings tells us that the prophet Elisha wept when he saw Hazael, knowing what devastation he would bring to Israel. Hazael becomes one of the most powerful and aggressive Aramean kings, attacking Israel repeatedly, conquering territory, weakening the northern kingdom. It's in this context, this world of shifting borders, of wars between Israel and Aram, of cities conquered and reconquered, that a stone monument is erected at Dan, the city gate. Picture the gate of Dan in the 9th century BC. Not a simple doorway, but a complex defensive structure. The gate is the most vulnerable point in any city's fortifications, so it's the most heavily defended. At Dan, the gate is a massive structure. There are multiple chambers, rooms built into the thickness of the city wall on either side of the passageway. Guards could station themselves in these chambers, controlling who entered or exited. They could see anyone approaching long before they reached the gate itself. The entrance has multiple doors, each one another barrier that would have to be breached by an attacking army. The passageway between the outer and inner gates creates a killing zone where defenders on the walls above could rain down arrows and stones on anyone trapped there. Inside the gate complex, there are benches, stone benches built along the walls of the chambers. This is where the elders of the city would sit to conduct business, to hear legal cases, to make decisions affecting the community. The city gate isn't just for defense. It's the civic center, the place where public life happens. Abraham rose and bowed down before the people of the land, the Hittites. He said to them, "If you are willing to let me bury my dead, then listen to me and intercede with Ephron, son of Zohar, on my behalf. Let him sell it to me for the full price as a burial site among you." Ephron the Hittite was sitting among his people, and he replied to Abraham in the hearing of all the Hittites who had come to the gate of his city. The gate, where business is done, where agreements are made, where justice is dispensed, where the elders sit and discuss the affairs of the city. And outside the gate, there's a plaza, an open area where people gather, where merchants set up their wares, where travelers rest before entering the city. It's in this plaza, or perhaps built into the gate structure itself, that a stone monument is erected, a victory stele, a commemoration of military triumph. The monument is made of basalt, the dark volcanic stone common in this region. It's carved with an inscription in Aramaic, the language of Aram, the kingdom to the north. The inscription boasts of victory over Israel, over the house of David, the king who erected it. Perhaps Hazael, perhaps another Aramean ruler, wants everyone who enters Dan to see it, to know that Aram has triumphed, that the God of Aram has given victory, that the kings of Israel and Judah have been defeated. The stele stands there for some time, years, perhaps decades, a monument to power, a declaration of dominance. But empires rise and fall, powers shift. The Aramean dominance doesn't last forever. Eventually, Dan is retaken by Israel or passes to new conquerors. The political situation changes, and at some point, someone dismantles the victory stele, perhaps in an act of defiance, destroying the monument to an old enemy, perhaps simply because they need building stones and this one is available. The stele is broken into pieces. The pieces are used as fill, as rubble, in later construction projects at the gate. They're incorporated into walls, buried in the ground, covered over by new layers of building and rebuilding. And there they lie, forgotten. For 2,800 years, July 1993. Let us move forward now through the centuries, through the fall of the northern kingdom to Assyria, through the Babylonian conquest and the Persian period, through Greek and Roman rule, through Islamic and Crusader periods, through Ottoman rule, and into the modern era. The Tel of Dan is being excavated. This isn't the first excavation here. Archaeologists have been working at Dan for decades, uncovering layer after layer of ancient occupation, tracing the history of this important site. It's July 1993. The summer excavation season is in progress. Teams of archaeologists and volunteers are working in different areas of the Tel. The work is hot, dusty, painstaking. Square meters are measured out. Soil is carefully removed, sifted, examined. Every pottery shard, every piece of bone, every fragment of metal or stone is catalogued. One team is working in the area of the ancient city gate. They've been uncovering remains of the gate complex. The massive walls, the chambers, the paved floors. It's impressive architecture, a testament to the importance of Dan in ancient times. Gila Cook is working in this area. She's a member of the excavation team, experienced in the careful work of archaeology. She's removing soil, looking for the edge of a wall, trying to understand the stratigraphy, the layering of deposits that tells the story of how the gate was built, used, modified, destroyed, rebuilt over the centuries. And then she sees something. A stone. A piece of basalt. It's broken, irregular in shape. But one face is smooth. Too smooth to be natural. She looks closer. There are marks on the smooth face. Lines. Grooves. Deliberate. Carved. Letters. She's found an inscription. The discovery. Gila calls over the area supervisor. The director of the excavation comes. They carefully examine the stone, still partly embedded in the ancient wall where it had been reused as fill. The inscription is in Aramaic, written in the script used in the 9th century BC. The stone is fragmentary. It's clearly part of a larger monument that was broken in antiquity. But even in this fragment, enough text survives to read several lines. And in one of those lines, a phrase that makes everyone stop and stare. House of David. Beit David in the ancient script. Beit David in Hebrew. House of David. This is the first time, the very first time, that the name David has been found in any ancient inscription outside the Bible. The first archaeological evidence from the period mentioning David or his dynasty. The stone is carefully excavated, photographed in situ, documented, then carefully removed and taken to the lab for further study. Epigraphy experts, scholars who specialize in ancient inscriptions, examine it. They transcribe the text, reading each letter carefully, comparing it to other Aramaic inscriptions from the same period. They try to reconstruct the missing portions, to understand the context of what survives. And as they study it, the significance becomes clear. This is a victory stele erected by an Aramean king, probably Hazael of Damascus, boasting about military victories over Israel and Judah. The inscription mentions defeating the king of Israel and the king of Judah, referring to Judah as the house of David. The text. Let's read the surviving portions of the inscription together. The text is fragmentary, broken, with many missing sections. But here's what can be read. My father went up against him when he fought at, and my father lay down. He went to his fathers. Now the king of Israel had penetrated into my father's land before. But then Hadad made me king, and Hadad went before me, and I went forth from the 7 of my kingdom, and I killed 70 kings who had harnessed thousands of chariots and thousands of horsemen. And I killed Joram, son of Ahab, king of Israel. And I killed Ahaziah, son of Joramkin, of the house of David. And I set their towns into ruins, and turned their land into desolation. Even in this broken state, the text is remarkable. It mentions specific biblical kings: Joram or Jehoram, son of Ahab, king of Israel, and Ahaziah, son of Joram, king of Judah, king of the house of David. These events are described in the Bible in 2 Kings 8-9. Joram of Israel and Ahaziah of Judah were allies, related by marriage. They fought together against Hazael of Aram at Ramoth Gilead. Joram was wounded and went to Jezreel to recover. Ahaziah went to visit him there. And then Jehu, an Israelite commander, staged a coup. He killed both Joram and Ahaziah. The biblical account attributes this to Jehu. The Aramean inscription claims credit for Hazael. Perhaps both kings were involved in the conflicts that led to these deaths. Perhaps the inscription is exaggerating Hazael's role. Or perhaps there are details we don't fully understand about these complex events. But the essential point is clear. The inscription is talking about the same time period, the same events, the same people described in the biblical books of Kings. And it calls Judah the house of David. The significance. Before this discovery, skeptics had questioned whether David was a historical figure at all. The biblical accounts of David were written centuries after he lived. Maybe David was legendary, they suggested. Maybe he was mythologized. Maybe he was a minor chieftain whose story grew in the telling until he became the great king described in Samuel and Kings. But here was evidence from just a few generations after David's time. An enemy of Israel, writing in the 9th century BC, referring to the southern kingdom as the house of David. The Arameans didn't believe the biblical accounts. They didn't worship Israel's God. They had no reason to inflate David's importance. They were simply using the standard way of referring to Judah, by the name of its founding dynasty. This meant that David wasn't a legend. He was a real historical figure, significant enough that his dynasty gave its name to the entire kingdom. The House of David was a recognized political entity in the 9th century BC, known to Israel's neighbors and enemies. The inscription is now dated to around 840 to 835 BC, based on the style of the script and the historical context. If David reigned around 1000 BC, as biblical chronology suggests, then this inscription is from about 160 years later. That's remarkably close, historically speaking. Only 3 or 4 generations. It's like something from the early 1800s from our perspective today. Additional fragments. The discovery didn't end with that first fragment. In the following excavation season, in 1994, two more fragments of the same inscription were found, also reused in later construction at the gate. These additional fragments don't contain the phrase House of David, but they fit together with the first fragment, allowing scholars to reconstruct more of the original monument and to better understand its context. The stele was probably about 3 feet high, maybe more. The inscription ran in horizontal lines across the stone. When intact, it would have been an impressive monument, standing in or near the gate of Dan, visible to everyone who passed through. The 3 fragments that have been found represent only a portion of the original. Much of the stele is still missing, lost when it was broken up in antiquity. But what survives is enough to confirm that David was real, that his dynasty was real, that the biblical accounts are describing actual history, not inventing it. The stone today. The Tel Dan inscription is now housed in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, in a special exhibit about biblical archaeology. You can stand before it, this broken piece of dark basalt with its ancient Aramaic letters. It doesn't look like much. It's rough, fragmentary, small. The inscription is hard to read if you don't know ancient Aramaic script. The stone is dark, the letters carved shallowly. But this unimpressive-looking fragment changed biblical archaeology. It settled debates. It confirmed what believers had always maintained and what skeptics had questioned. David was real. The house of David was real. The biblical accounts are grounded in history. The stone speaks. After 2,800 years of silence, after being broken and buried and forgotten, it speaks. And what it says is simple but profound. David existed. His dynasty existed. The story is real. The biblical David. The Bible gives us extensive accounts of David's life, shepherding his father's flocks as a boy in Bethlehem, being anointed by the prophet Samuel, playing the harp to soothe King Saul's troubled spirit, facing Goliath with just a sling and 5 smooth stones, fleeing from Saul's jealous rage, living as an outlaw in the wilderness, becoming king first of Judah, then of all Israel, conquering Jerusalem and making it his capital, bringing the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, sinning with Bathsheba and facing the consequences, dealing with rebellion within his own family, growing old and passing the throne to Solomon. It's a detailed, complex portrait, not a simple hero story. David is shown with all his flaws, his failures, his sins, his weaknesses, but also his faith, his repentance, his heart for God. The biblical writers clearly loved David. They saw him as the ideal king, the standard against which all other kings would be measured. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, as his father David had done. Or conversely, he did evil in the eyes of the Lord, unlike his father David. But was David real? Was he historical? Or was he a legendary figure, perhaps based on a real person, but greatly embellished? The Tel Dan inscription answers that question. David was real enough that a hostile Aramean king, writing just a few generations later, identified Judah by reference to David's dynasty. The promise to David. the significance of David in biblical theology goes far beyond whether he was historical. David is important because of the promise God made to him. In 2 Samuel 7, David wants to build a temple for God. He's living in a palace of cedar, while the ark of God is in a tent. It seems wrong to him. He wants to honor God by building a permanent dwelling. But God sends the prophet Nathan to David with a different message. Are you the one to build me a house to dwell in? The Lord declares to you that the Lord himself will establish a house for you. When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. This is the Davidic covenant, God's promise to David. His dynasty will endure. His throne will be established forever. One of his descendants will always rule. This promise becomes central to Israel's hope, even when the kingdom splits, even when the northern kingdom falls to Assyria, even when Jerusalem is conquered and the temple destroyed and the people carried off to Babylon. The promise remains. David's line will endure. One day, a son of David will reign. And this hope shapes everything that follows. The prophets speak of a coming king from David's line. Isaiah says, "Of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever." Jeremiah prophesies, "The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up for David a righteous branch, a king who will reign wisely and do what is just and right in the land. When the Messiah comes, he will be the son of David, the heir to David's throne, the fulfillment of God's promise. The house of David endures." And remarkably, the promise holds. Through all the ups and downs of Judah's history, through good kings and bad, through Assyrian threats and Babylonian conquest, David's line continues. When the angel Gabriel appears to Mary in Nazareth, his message begins with this: "You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you are to call him Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever. His kingdom will never end." Jesus is presented in the Gospels as the son of David. The genealogies in Matthew and Luke trace his lineage back through David. When he enters Jerusalem for the last time, the crowds shout, "Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." The promise to David finds its ultimate fulfillment in Jesus, the eternal throne, the kingdom without end, the Son of David who will reign forever. Reflections on remembrance. There's something beautiful about the way the Tel Dan inscription preserves David's memory, even though it was carved by an enemy. The Aramean king who erected this stele meant it as a boast, a declaration of victory, a monument to his own glory. He defeated the house of David. He killed their king. He conquered their territory. But he preserved David's name. He testified, unwittingly, to David's significance. He confirmed that David's dynasty was important enough to be worth mentioning, worth fighting against, worth commemorating in stone. Our enemies sometimes preserve our legacy better than we could ourselves. They testify to our significance by the very fact that they oppose us. They confirm our impact by the energy they spend fighting against us. God's purposes endure even through opposition. David's name is remembered, carved in stone by a king who wanted to boast of defeating him. And David's line endures, despite all attempts to cut it off, because God's promise cannot be broken. The stele was broken, buried, forgotten for 2,800 years, but it survived. And when it was found, it testified, not to the glory of the Aramean king, we don't even know his name for certain, but to the reality of David and his dynasty. What God establishes endures. What God promises, he fulfills. The house that God builds cannot be torn down, no matter how powerful the opposition. Resting in the promise. As you prepare for sleep, rest in this truth. God's promises endure. The promise to David endured through conquest and exile, through the fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple, through centuries of waiting. And it was fulfilled in Jesus, the Son of David, whose kingdom truly has no end. Whatever promises God has made to you, they will endure. They may seem forgotten. The evidence may be buried. The opposition may seem overwhelming. But God remembers. God fulfills. God's word stands firm. A piece of broken stone, buried for 2,800 years, testified to God's faithfulness. The house of David was real. The promise was real. And it led, through all the centuries, to Jesus. Your story may feel broken, fragmentary, buried under layers of difficulty and disappointment. But God knows where all the pieces are. God can bring them to light in his time. God can use even the monuments erected by enemies to testify to his truth. Rest in this. Rest in the knowledge that God's promises endure, that what he establishes cannot be overthrown, that his purposes will be fulfilled. The stone spoke after 2,800 years of silence. God's word never falls silent. It endures forever, and it speaks life and hope and promise, even in the darkness, even when we can't see the evidence, even when we're waiting for the breakthrough. The Tel Dan inscription sits in a museum now, behind glass, carefully preserved. Scholars study it. Visitors look at it. It's famous in archaeological circles, one of the most important biblical discoveries of the 20th century. But its true significance isn't in the stone itself. It's in what the stone confirms. David was real. His dynasty was real. The biblical accounts are describing actual history, not inventing mythology. And if David was real, if the promise to David was real, if the house of David endured through all the opposition and all the centuries, then the Son of David, Jesus, is real too. The promise endures. The throne is established. The kingdom has no end. Sleep now in this truth. Rest in the promise. Let the testimony of stone accompany you into peaceful sleep. God is faithful. His promises endure. What he establishes cannot be overthrown. The inscription speaks. After 2,800 years, it testifies. The house of David was real, and the Son of David reigns forever. Rest in this. Sleep in peace. The stone has spoken. The promise endures.